Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday night Bible study on the book of Daniel. We've been in this study now. This is our 6th week. I'll tell you, I've certainly enjoyed the study, and it's actually the study on this book of Daniel that's probably gotten the most feedback, the most information on. So I'll tell you, I'm certainly glad that everyone is enjoying the study. I hope everyone's able to take something away from the study. There's certainly a lot of information in here for us, a lot of practical information that sometimes we look at this book as a compilation of neat stories, and it is a bunch of neat stories. But as I've been emphasizing throughout this entire point, there's a lot of application in this for us as well. So really, that's the focus of this study. It's not to get into Hebrew translations. It's not to get into all of these. It's to get into the application. The words here, it was written for our study, our understanding, our knowledge. So what is it trying to tell us? So this week we're going to start in Daniel chapter 6. Now you remember from last week, Daniel chapter 6 is starting a new era. You go all the way back to King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2, and Daniel comes in and he tells him the meaning of this dream, right? The big statue with the golden head, the body of silver, the chest of silver. And he's explaining it to them that these are all different nations, that one's going to fall, one's going to rise, and they're going to keep going. But initially, in the end, they're all going to be destroyed by a stone that's going to be cut out without hands. And so we've seen part of this transition already from chapter 5 to chapter 6. You remember Belshazzar, who was the second king under his father Nabonidus. He's ruler over Babylon at the time, and they're drinking, they're partying, they're making a mockery of all the things that were brought back from the temple in Jerusalem, and they're just celebrating. So all the while, the Medes and the Persians are outside their gates. They're formulating their plan. They're going to end up rerouting part of the Euphrates River, and they're essentially going to just stroll into the city on the riverbed. And at the end of chapter 5, verse 30 says, "That very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old." So we're going to pick up now in chapter 6 with Darius, who we've just ended chapter 5 with. Now what you will see in verse 6, Darius actually seems to be a pretty decent guy. And towards the end of the chapter, we'll really see that. Now, I don't want to get too far and give too many accolades for him on this, but we can kind of get that approach as we go through this. But let's just notice the first verse real quick. "It pleased Darius," the king who's just now taken over for the slain Belshazzar, "it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom." Then in verse 2, "And over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss." So Darius is going to set 120 satraps, and this is a unique word here for the Medes and the Persians, meaning these, and it almost means governor. That's really almost what it's getting at. But then when we see the 3 that it's talking about, these are almost as if presidents. These are set above the other. These 3 are the ones that are going to be essentially ruling the people. And if you notice how it ends in chapter 2, how it ends in verse 2, Daniel was one, the satraps might give account to them so that the king would suffer no loss. So you've got these 3 men, of which Daniel is one, and they have a responsibility. Darius is basically looking at these 3 men like, listen, watch my back. You guys are looking out for me. I'm the king. Watch, make sure I don't have any losses. And it's 3 men. Now, what we're going to see in verse 3, well, let's go ahead and read verse 3. "Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and the satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the entire realm." So 120 down to 3 over them. And now Daniel distinguished himself above the rest. He's distinguished himself above the rest. And he is going to be set essentially to rule over all of them. Now, if you've got 3 people and you have this responsibility, all right, you're going to watch the king's back. That's what he's telling you. You're going to keep an eye on it. You're going to help protect the king. This is your job. This is what you're going to do. How well do you think the other 2 are going to respond when they hear that Daniel is being set above the rest? How are all these satraps going to respond? See, everybody's fighting to be the best. Now, if you're not someone who's the next in line, Daniel is the one that's set apart. He's distinguished. He's higher than the rest. So guess what that just put on Daniel's back? That just put a bullseye on his back. And you see, you think and we get in your mind that if you're excelling and you're doing really well and things are going great, that people are happy for you and they're celebrating and they're applauding for you, but in reality they're plotting your demise in a worldly idea, in a worldly thought, because in a worldly thought it's all about me. It's about what can I get? How can I excel? I want to be the best. I don't want to be next to Daniel. I'm going to get Daniel out of my way and then it's going to be all about me. How can I get Daniel out of the way? And that is a very worldly mindset, but the reality is it's not a worldly mindset that died with the Medes and the Persians thousands of years ago. That's still an ever-present mindset today. So Daniel was distinguished, he was set above. So notice what verse 4 says. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. Now listen to the compliment they're basically going to give Daniel. But they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. So guess what happens if you can't find anything? They're trying to dig up dirt on Daniel. Now, put that into perspective for just a moment. How would you feel if that was you and you're Daniel? And they're trying to dig up dirt on you. Is that something you're going to be real excited about? You know, you think about these public officials today and what they go through. And in fact, it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. This part doesn't matter. I do believe there's a lot that differentiates the two. But this is not a political discussion. But these groups have these watchdog parties. This is nothing more than I'm going to try to figure out how much dirt I can dig up on this person. I'm going to take that person down. You just wait and see. And they're trying to dig up dirt on them. And now for the common person, myself included especially, before I gave my life to Christ, I was somebody that would not be running for public office doing that kind of stuff because, like everybody, I have a past. I don't want somebody digging up my past, the things that I regret that I've done and that I've begged for forgiveness of. But they're trying to dig up this stuff on Daniel and they can't find anything. And in fact, it says they can find no fault with him because he was faithful. Now understand, we know Daniel was not perfect. There's only and only will have ever been one perfect person to have lived. That, of course, is Jesus Christ. But they are trying to find fault with him, of which they are not able to do. We know he's faithful. We know he has received the blessings of God because he has thrived. His entire life since he was a late teenager has been spent under pagan kings in a foreign land, following the people being brought back into captivity to Babylon. But he's thrived the entire time because God has blessed him. God has been with him just as God was with the 3 Hebrew boys because they would remain faithful. But notice what they said, that they can't give up because they know Daniel is innocent. They know that he's not done anything wrong. And I want you to listen to those words and put yourself in that position. Don't think they're just going to give up. So verse 5 says, Then these men said, We shall not find any charge against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. I can't find any fault with Daniel, but I'll tell you what, if we can find something to make him go against his God because he's faithful, we'll have him. Let's make him turn on God. Let's come up with something that makes him being a Christian, and obviously I'm using a New Testament term Christian, but let's come up with something that makes him a faithful follower of God, that he can't do, where he'll have to decide. And either we'll get rid of him, or he'll conform to what we want him to do. Now, they obviously believe that he was not going to, because they've already acknowledged the fact that he was faithful. But put that in terms that we can relate to today. Especially political correctness, popular opinion. You see, people attack the church because of what this book says. And if you hold and live your life to what this book says, you're going to be attacked for it. Well, because that's not necessarily the popular opinion. That's not necessarily what people want to hear. That's not the thing that we really want. We want to be happy. We want to be rich. We want to do the things that would be done in pagan temples that would be frowned upon. We want to do that kind of stuff. And if you live your life by this, if you go up to say to somebody, well, guess what? Homosexuality is a sin. I don't hate you. I love you person, but I hate the sin. And I don't want to see you sin. Homosexuality is a sin. And then you got churches and Christians, and I guess I put air quotes on them, that are standing behind places like Planned Parenthood because, well, it's not the popular opinion to go against something like that. You know, it's more popular to be on the side of that kind of stuff. Well, that's not what the book says. The book says it's never right to take life. It's always right to defend life. And so if you stand for what the Word says, people are going to try to take you down by that Word. They're going to try to get you to turn on that Word. And that's exactly what they're doing with Daniel because they know he's faithful. They can't come up with anything else. But they devise a plan. In verse 6 and following, we're going to get to the plan. Now, this account here that we're about to look at is probably one that majority of people are very familiar with. As a matter of fact, it's an account that we as Christians hold near and dear to our hearts. It's an account that we know from childhood age. I think it was one of the first stories I remember being taught in Bible study. And it's something we hold near and dear to us, but it has a very serious message to it. And we're going to see that as we get into this. So let's notice what verse 6 says. Let's notice the plan that they're coming up with. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. That's how they would announce the king. That's how they would address the king. O king, live forever. Sign of respect and reverence for this king. Only if they'd have had that for the living God. Verse 7 says, all the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute. Now that's a lie, because Daniel was not involved, and in fact Daniel is the one being set above all of them. So they already lied to him here and said, well, we're all coming together on this. This is something we've all agreed to, and flat lied about it, to make this firm decree. Well, what is the decree? That whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. So they've already lied. They've already said that we've all agreed to this thing when they hadn't. Daniel obviously was not part of that, nor from everything we know of Daniel's faith, he would not have been part of that. So they've told this lie that they've all agreed to it. So what is the plan? Well, for 30 days, no one can worship or pray to any man, and more importantly in Daniel's case, to any god. Daniel's case, the God, the only God. Not some pagan god in reference for them, but the living God. And if they do, then they will be cast into a den of lions. Verse 8 says, now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed. Now, I want you to hear that part. It cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. So we've already seen a change now. So if you remember, I've mentioned it already, the statue. The statue from Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2. And the statue, of course, was the highest value and most precious metal, being the gold. That was Nebuchadnezzar. That was Babylon and his reign. Nebuchadnezzar was the guy. He was the guy. Now, if he made a law and he wanted to change it, it was changed. Done, over with. But as the metal and values decrease, so do their power and authority. You see, when Darius sets this decree, he can't change it. The king does not even have the power to alter this. And verse 9 says, therefore King Darius signed the written decree. So think about that for just a moment before we get into verse 10. Now, as I said, this is an account we're all pretty familiar with, I believe. But put yourself in Daniel's position. What would you do? In reality, what would you do? Now, not to use us in our situation today where we're dealing and struggling with this COVID-19. We are in no way forsaking the assembly of ourselves together in using the good sense that God gave us. Just as He gave us the sense to get out of the rain, He gave us the sense to understand that when we're facing a pandemic like we are today, to protect ourselves. But imagine it was something different and the government has come and said, you can't go to church because we don't believe in your God and you're not going to be able to worship them. If you do, you're going to be cast into a den of lions, which you got to admit, they get creativity points for their punishments here. The fiery furnace, the den of lions, I mean, they got to get credit for that at least. But what would you do in that case? Would you be like Daniel? And you've heard the phrase, and I think it's a very fitting phrase, dare to be a Daniel. Well, why do you want to dare to be a Daniel? Dare to say with confidence, I don't care what you're doing. You're not going to stop me from worshiping my God. I don't care what you're doing. Dare to be a Daniel and stand on your faith. Dare to be a Daniel and say, I don't care that you don't think that this is wrong. Whatever, I've already named a few. Marriage, divorce, unlawful marriage, homosexuality, whatever it may be. I don't care what you necessarily think about it. The Bible is the law, and I care what the Bible says. Dare to be a Daniel. So why did that phrase come about? Dare to be a Daniel. Well, let's look at what verse 10 says. The decree has been signed. We've already said King Darius can't even change this decree now. But verse 10 says, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. Well, what are you going to do, Daniel? And in his upper room, with his windows open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since the early days. He went up to his room 3 times. He prayed with the windows open towards Jerusalem. Now you go back to Solomon's prayer there, and you say, well, why was that important that he was praying, 1, with the windows open? We'll get back to that. And 2, towards Jerusalem. Well, you look at what Solomon prayed after the temple was built, and he told them that if the people are taken off into captivity, they're in bondage, let them turn towards the temple, which was Jerusalem, and let them pray. Now, of course, they're taking this literally. Daniel's taking this literally, and he's facing towards Jerusalem and he's praying. But it says that his window is open. His window is open. So they see him doing this. And do you ever ask yourself a simple question here? Why not just close the windows? I mean, all right, Daniel, I get it. You're faithful. Why not just close the windows? He's not trying to hide his faith. He's faithful to God above all else, regardless of the outcome. Just as the 3 Hebrew boys, when all the music played and everyone else was bowing, why didn't they just go somewhere where they wouldn't be seen? Instead of standing in the crowd of everybody else kneeling, and it was obvious. Well, Daniel wasn't trying to hide his faith. He was focused on his faith. He's praying and he's giving thanks to God, which is his custom. And he's been doing that since his early days. And obviously it's paid off for him. He's faithful to God, and in return God has blessed him. So verse 11 says, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Then the king answered, the thing is true according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. So here's your tattletales, right? They're trying to take Daniel out. They've got to come up with something. So they've got this now. They run to him, hey, king, isn't this what you said? Not even you have the power to change this. Here's what your buddy Daniel's doing. So what are you going to do about it? Verse 13, they answered and said before the king, that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or of the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Well, we've already been told that's what he's been doing the whole time he's been there, since he was young. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. So this is why I said we look at Darius almost in a good light. Darius knows now what they've done. They've tricked him. They've trapped Daniel, and they're trying to get rid of him. Darius realizes that. Now he's laboring till the going down of the sun to deliver him from this thing. He's trying to come up with some way. You could just imagine Darius calling in the local lawyers for the Medes and the Persians and saying, okay, well, what can I do about this? This is obviously not right. I was tricked. This is a trap. What can we do about this? But the men come back. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, you know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians. You know this, king. You can keep trying, but you know that. I mean, who are you, Nebuchadnezzar? No, you're Darius. This is what we do. That is the law of the Medes and Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed, not even by the king. So the king gave the command, and you can imagine him just not wanting to give this command. But the king's going to do it anyways. In verse 16, and they brought Daniel, and they cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. How about that? How about that statement right there? Not may he deliver you. Just hear that. Now, I'm in no way trying to say that Darius, was a God worshiper or anything, but he's obviously heard the God of Judah. And now he says, he will deliver you. We're going to get back to that in just a moment. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Well, Daniel's already been thrown into the lion's den. It doesn't really matter what you're going to change now. But I keep going back to that phrase. Darius did not want to do this. He wanted to find some way that Daniel would be saved. And he says, your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. What else stories had Darius heard of this living God of Daniel? I keep coming back to that. I find that verse fascinating. So Daniel is now in the lion's den. And it's funny, we see lions a good bit in the Bible. We see lion in reference to Satan walking around as a roaring lion, devouring people. Book of Revelation, Jesus is the Lion of Judah. And now here, Daniel is cast into a den of lions, literal lions. So we've seen this in history now a good bit in the Bible. But it's part of this is almost comical in my opinion. Notice what verse 18 says. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And he came to the den, and he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel, a concerned, caring voice. But I find it almost comical. He couldn't sleep. I mean, was he in with the den of lions himself? I mean, he couldn't sleep. He's worried about Daniel. He has a lamenting voice to Daniel, saying, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Now, I want to make a point here on Daniel's response to this attack. And I want you to think about our response to this attack. Daniel knows what they've done, what these governors and satraps, he knows what they've done. Darius knows what they've done. Why didn't Daniel fight back? Why didn't they cast stones at Daniel, proverbial stones. Why didn't Daniel throw stones back at him? Why didn't he fight back? Why just go along with it? And every time I get to this, my mind goes to another account. 1 Samuel chapter 18. And I want you to remember what happened with the young David at that point. And King Saul is still there, and he's being tormented by this image and these dreams that he's having. He's getting delirious. He's talking crazy. And so they find a musician to come in and play for him, and it calms him. And this, of course, is David. And David is in there playing, but David is becoming more popular. People are starting to talk about David, and that drives Saul furious. So David is playing his music for the king. Well, Saul takes out a spear, throws it at David, and he misses. David's young, he moves, he misses. And my question for that is, why didn't David take the spear and throw it back? A spear was literally cast. Why not cast it back? And in fact, you go through the rest of the account of Samuel, 1 Samuel, he had an opportunity in the cave, did he not? He had a couple of opportunities with Saul sleeping, and when he went into the cave and David cut off a piece of his robe, then he felt bad about it. Why not just go ahead and end it there? And in fact, when Saul's sleeping, the guy that's with David says, listen, I'll take care of it right here. They're in a deep sleep. Listen, this will be over. Why not cast a stone when a stone was cast at you? See, Daniel didn't do it. David didn't do it. Jesus didn't do it. The apostles didn't do it. Now, I understand Peter cut the ear off of Malchus, but once the church was established and they were filled with the Holy Spirit, they weren't casting stones either. Stones were being cast at them. You see, it's different. When you believe in God and you're faithful to God, it's different. People of the world, the pettiness, the self-centeredness, the self-focus, that's what they care about. They care about being number one. Daniel didn't care about being number one. Daniel cared about being faithful to God first and foremost. That's what was important. He wasn't worried about casting a stone, just as he wasn't worried about closing the windows. He wasn't worried about the den of lions. Because just as the angel of the Lord was with the 3 Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace, they're walking around, the smell of smoke is not even on them when they come out, so does the angel close the mouth of these lions. Daniel wasn't harmed. Now, you go back to Bible school days, and maybe you're still there now. And we've seen that image, right? Daniel just kind of sitting in the middle of the room and lions are just kind of laid around him, almost like a bunch of pets. An angel closed the mouths of these lions. Now, we're going to see the power of these lions here in just a moment. We don't have but a few verses to go. And we're going to see what these lions can do. But an angel closed the mouth of the lion. Why? Why would he do that? Why send an angel to do that? Because Daniel was faithful. Daniel wasn't trying to take on this problem by himself, guilty. He wasn't trying to go about it his own way, guilty. He didn't think he could just fight back and throw a stone right back at him, guilty. He stopped and said, I'm going to go pray to God just as I always have, for deliverance, for guidance, for forgiveness. And God delivered. You see the power of what faith in God can do? When we stop trying to go about it our own way and do our own thing. Verse 23 says, Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in God. Hear that. That's one of the biggest verses of this entire chapter so far. He wasn't saved from the lions because the lions had already had a midnight snack and they're not really hungry. No injury whatever was found on him because of 6 words. Because he believed in his God. He was faithful to God, and God delivered him. So notice what Darius does next. And it's almost funny. You go back and you look at Nebuchadnezzar and the impact that Daniel had on Nebuchadnezzar. And that at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's life, he actually turned to worshiping God. Finally. He said it several times, but finally after 7 years of being punished and living as a wild beast, he worships God. Now, Daniel is in this pagan-filled nation. And notice what Darius is about to say. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men. Now, here's these liars and accusers, and those that are trying to trick Daniel, trick the faithful, and brought those men that had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Them, their children, their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. This is some powerful lines, okay? So they throw in all these liars, all these ones that were trying to trick them, all these evil doers. Now, think about this in a prophetic sense, or in an apocalyptic sense, in that Daniel and Revelation have a lot of ties to that point, to writings of things much bigger than what they might seem like. See, what happened to the faithful? What happened to Daniel? Well, he was cast into a den of lions. And it seems like that's a horrible punishment. It seems like for him it's about to be over. It seems like it's all of these bad things. But God delivered him. And what happened to the ones that thought they were victorious, thought they had gotten away with it, thought they were able to live how they wanted, and there was no consequences? Their time came. Their time came, and when they were cast into the den, they were dead and broken in pieces before they ever hit the bottom of the den. God doesn't need us to take vengeance on things. He's got it under control. God doesn't need us to go win a fight and throw a stone. He's got it under control. God only wants us to be faithful. Be a Daniel. Be faithful. We don't have to do more than that. We don't have to be more than that. We need to stop trying to be God and start trying to be a Daniel. So notice what King Darius wrote now. Verse 25. We got three verses to go. Verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian, and in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and in the reign of Belshazzar and Nabonidus. Daniel thrived. Daniel thrived. They lied. They tried to trap him. They tried to do all these things. So in closing, I just kind of have this thought. And it goes back to the battles we face. We don't need to pick up the spear and cast it back, just as David didn't need to do that. David didn't need to sneak around in a dark cave and kill Saul. God had it under control. Daniel didn't need to fight back as he was being cast into a line of dens and came out unscathed. The three Hebrew boys didn't fight, didn't argue. All they said is, regardless of what happens, we will not worship you or your image. So what does God desire from us then? Is it to be this victorious fighter as David was and to do all of these things, or is it to be a Daniel? And you've heard that phrase likely many times. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to be faithful. That's all God calls for us. To be faithful. And look what happens if you're faithful and we don't try to hide in our faith. You don't try to bow out to whatever pressures may be that says, well, that Bible sure was written a long time ago and it's not really relevant to us today. Just be faithful. It's not any more complicated than that. Well, I appreciate your time during this study of Daniel chapter 6. I hope you've enjoyed the study. I hope it's been a fruitful study for you. If you have any questions or any comments on the study, please make sure you're getting them on the post. I will go in and respond to them as soon as I possibly can. If you'd like to study further into this, I'd be more than happy to do so as well. I hope you guys have a good rest of your night, good rest of your week. We will be back together on here, Lord willing, tomorrow night as we continue our study in the book of Ephesians. Thank you all. Have a good night and God bless.